A Hell's Angel disguised himself as a plumber and was shocked to see his employee defending her mother. John Hammer Sullivan was a man forged in the crucible of leather, chrome, and the unwritten laws of the open road. For decades, his name had echoed with a certain gravitas within the Hells Angels, a testament to his unwavering loyalty and his formidable presence. But life, as he was discovering, had a peculiar way of throwing curveballs, even at the most hardened of souls. Now, instead of roaring down highways on a custom chopper, Hammer found himself navigating the far less glamorous world of clogged drains and leaky faucets. He was a Hells Angel, yes, but today, he was also the proprietor of Sullivan's Plumbing Solutions, a fledgling business he was attempting to run with an improbable air of legitimacy. The transformation hadn't been easy. The tattoos still snaked across his forearms and up his neck, telltale signs of a past he couldn't simply scrub away. His eyes, though often hidden behind a pair of dark sunglasses, still held the piercing intensity of a man who had seen too much and feared too little. But the worn leather vest had been replaced by a navy blue work shirt, emblazoned with the company logo, a friendly-looking wrench, and his signature skull ring now seemed a peculiar anomaly next to a tape measure and a pipe cutter. Hammer's foray into plumbing was less a genuine career change and more a strategic pivot, a way to keep a low profile while still generating untraceable income. He'd envisioned it as a front, a simple facade, but the surprising reality was that plumbing, in its own mundane way, was demanding. It required a different kind of precision, a different kind of problem-solving. And, to his own quiet astonishment, he was actually good at it. Or, at least, his employees were. One of his most reliable employees was Sarah. Young, perhaps in her late 20s, with bright, intelligent eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, Sarah was the antithesis of everything Hammer had ever known. She was meticulous, punctual, and possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of residential plumbing systems. Her hands, though small, were strong and capable, navigating wrenches and pipes with an efficiency that often left Hammer himself impressed. He knew little of her personal life, only that she was fiercely dedicated to her work, often picking up extra shifts, and that she lived with her elderly mother in an older, working-class neighborhood on the city's outskirts. He respected her quiet resilience, a trait he recognized, oddly enough, from his own world, though it manifested in entirely different ways. On this particular Tuesday morning, a call had come in for a persistent leak in a bathroom pipe, somewhere in that same older neighborhood. It was a routine job, the kind Sarah handled effortlessly. But Hammer, feeling an uncharacteristic itch to get out of the office and perhaps, to his own amusement, to inspect Sarah's work, decided to go along. He told her he was a new apprentice, a cousin from out of town, just learning the ropes. He even donned a slightly ill-fitting clean work shirt, pulled a baseball cap low over his forehead, and tried to soften his usual stern expression into something vaguely approachable. It was a bizarre charade, and he almost chuckled at the absurdity of a Hell's Angel pretending to be a greenhorn plumber's assistant. His real motive, however, was a vague unease he felt about the neighborhood, a sense that something might be brewing under the surface of its quiet, tree-lined streets. His instincts, honed over decades of navigating dangerous situations, were rarely wrong. They arrived at the address, a modest, slightly weathered bungalow with a well-tended but overgrown garden. The paint was peeling in places, but the windows were clean, and a potted geranium bloomed defiantly on the porch. Sarah grabbed her toolbox, a familiar weight in her hand, and Hammer followed, trying to look suitably eager yet inexperienced. As Sarah knocked, a frail-looking woman with kind eyes and silver hair, Mrs. Davies, opened the door. Her face lit up with a warm smile when she saw Sarah. "Sarah, dear. Thank you for coming so quickly. The leak's gotten worse." "No problem, Mom," Sarah replied, her voice softening perceptibly as she embraced her mother briefly. Hammer's eyebrows subtly rose under the brim of his cap. So, this was Sarah's mother. It added a new layer to the already strange situation. He hadn't known. As they stepped inside, the air was immediately charged with an uncomfortable tension. Another man was already in the small living room, standing over a worn armchair where Mrs. Davies had clearly been sitting. He was a burly man in a cheap suit, his face flushed and his posture aggressive. He held a stack of papers in his hand, one of which he was jabbing a finger at, his voice sharp and condescending. "Look, Mrs. Davies, we've been over this. The terms are clear. You're behind on your payments, and this property is scheduled for re-evaluation. Your options are limited, very limited. Mrs. Davies, her earlier smile now vanished, wrung her hands. But Mr. Thorne, I told you, I sent the payment. There must be some mistake. And my son-in-law, he said he'd look into the re-evaluation papers, they seemed complicated. Mr. Thorne scoffed, a sneer twisting his lips. Complicated? It's perfectly straightforward. You owe, you pay, or you move. Simple as that. Your son-in-law. Is he a lawyer? Because unless he is, his opinion means precisely nothing. And frankly, this delay is costing the company money. We're not running a charity here. He gestured dismissively around the small, tidy room, as if its very modesty was an offense. Sarah, who had been about to head towards the bathroom, froze. Her toolbox clattered softly as she set it down. Her head snapped up, her eyes narrowing as she took in the scene. The polite, professional plumber instantly vanished, replaced by a rigid posture of protective fury. "What's going on here, Mom?" she asked, her voice low and dangerously calm, a stark contrast to the casual greeting she'd given her mother just moments before. Mr. Thorne, startled by her sudden appearance and the intensity in her voice, turned slowly. He clearly hadn't noticed the plumbers enter. "Who are you?" he demanded, his tone brusque. "This is private business." "This is my mother," Sarah retorted, stepping forward, placing herself squarely between Mr. Thorne and Mrs. Davies. "And this is her home. Any business you have with her is now business you have with me." Hammer, standing a few paces back, ostensibly examining a crack in the wall, felt a jolt. This wasn't the Sarah he knew. The quiet, efficient plumber had been replaced by a lioness, her stance wide, her chin jutted out, her eyes blazing with an indignation that was both fierce and unwavering. It was a primal transformation, unexpected and utterly compelling. He watched, fascinated, as the scene escalated. His Hell's Angel instincts, dormant under the plumber's uniform, began to stir. Mr. Thorne, clearly unaccustomed to such direct defiance, puffed out his chest. "Look, Missy, I don't know who you think you are, but I'm here on behalf of Sterling Properties, and I have every right to discuss overdue payments and property assessments with Mrs. Davies. Now, if you'll excuse us, we were in the middle of a very important conversation." He made a move to step around Sarah, attempting to re-engage with Mrs. Davies, who was now visibly trembling. Sarah didn't budge. She extended an arm, not touching him, but creating an impassable barrier. "You will not speak to my mother like that. And you will not intimidate her in her own home. If you have paperwork, you can show it to me. And if there's any legitimate issue, my mother has legal representation who will deal with it. Not you, standing here, bullying an elderly woman." Mr. Thorne's face darkened further. He clearly wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by a young woman in work clothes. "Legal representation? Don't make me laugh. You people always try to pull that. Let me tell you, sweetheart, the law is on our side. And if you don't step aside, I'll have you removed for obstruction." He took another aggressive step forward, this time directly into Sarah's personal space, his voice rising in volume. "This woman is in default. She's costing us money. She is not in default." Sarah shot back, her voice now ringing with an authority that surprised even Hammer. "She sent the payment. There's a receipt. And the re-evaluation papers you keep waving around are filled with discrepancies. My brother-in-law, who is a paralegal, reviewed them. He said they were borderline fraudulent." A flicker of something akin to fear, or at least annoyance, crossed Mr. Thorne's face at the mention of a paralegal. But he quickly recovered, his anger overriding any caution. "Fraudulent? How dare you? You have no idea who you're dealing with." He lunged forward, not at Sarah, but towards Mrs. Davies, who was still seated, trying to snatch a small, crumpled envelope from her hand. It was clearly the payment receipt she'd mentioned. Before Hammer could even consciously process what was happening, Sarah moved. It was a blur of motion, swift and decisive. Her hand shot out, intercepting Mr. Thorne's wrist with surprising force. Her grip was like iron, stopping him cold. Her eyes, already blazing, now held a dangerous glint that Hammer instantly recognized from countless bar brawls and street fights. It was the look of someone pushed past their breaking point, someone ready to unleash absolute hell. "Don't you ever lay a hand on my mother," Sarah hissed, her voice a low growl that vibrated with raw, unadulterated fury. Her grip tightened, and Mr. Thorne let out a small yelp of pain, his face contorting. Hammer watched, utterly transfixed. This wasn't just an employee defending a client, this was a daughter defending her mother with a ferocity that was breathtaking. All semblance of the polite, professional plumber had evaporated. This was pure, unadulterated protective instinct, and it was magnificent. The Hell's Angel inside Hammer, the part of him that revered strength and loyalty above all else, felt a surge of something he hadn't experienced in years, genuine, unadulterated admiration. He was shocked, not just by Sarah's unexpected ferocity, but by the powerful, almost primal emotion it stirred within him. His hand instinctively went to his belt, where a concealed knife usually rested, a habit from his old life. He caught himself, realizing he was wearing a plumber's tool belt, not his old gear. But the urge to intervene, to step in and put this bully in his place, was overwhelming. He watched Sarah, holding Mr. Thorne's wrist, her knuckles white, her gaze unwavering. The man was clearly unnerved, trying to pull his hand free, but Sarah held him fast. He stammered, "Let go of me. You're assaulting me." "You tried to assault my mother," Sarah shot back, her voice still a dangerous whisper. "And you will apologize to her. Now." Her eyes flickered, just for a split second, to Hammer, a silent, almost imperceptible plea for backup, or perhaps just an acknowledgement of his presence as an ally. The look was enough. Hammer felt a deep, resonant rumble stir in his chest, a sensation he hadn't felt since his days as a Hell's Angel, standing shoulder to shoulder with his brothers. The plumber's disguise suddenly felt thin, almost transparent. He took a slow, deliberate step forward, his weight shifting, his broad shoulders tensing. The air in the small living room crackled with unspoken threats, a silent agreement forming between the unexpected allies. Mr. Thorne, sensing the shift in dynamics, his eyes darting to Hammer's imposing figure, began to sweat. He was clearly outmatched, not just by Sarah's unexpected resolve, but by the looming, silent presence of the apprentice, who now stood with a quiet menace that transcended any work uniform. Mr. Thorne struggled, his wrist caught in Sarah's unyielding grip. The yelp of pain had been involuntary, but the shock of being physically restrained by someone he dismissed as "Missy" was palpable. He tried to yank his arm free, but Sarah held on, her knuckles white, her gaze locked on his with an intensity that burned. Hammer, now a silent, imposing shadow, had taken another step, closing the distance, his presence radiating a quiet menace that made the air feel heavy. The apprentice persona had completely evaporated, replaced by something far older, far more dangerous. Mr. Thorne's eyes darted between Sarah's furious face and Hammer's unreadable, stone-cold expression. He was outmatched, and he knew it. The aggressive bluster that had marked his arrival began to deflate, replaced by a flicker of genuine fear. "Let go of me, you lunatic. This is assault." "I'll call the police," he stammered, his voice losing its earlier condescending edge. "You're lucky that's all you're getting," Sarah growled, her voice still low but vibrating with a controlled rage. "You came into my mother's home, you harassed her, and you tried to steal from her. This isn't assault, this is self-defense. And you're going to apologize to her, or you're going to regret it." Her grip tightened further, and Mr. Thorne winced, his face contorting in pain. Hammer finally spoke, his voice a low rumble that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. "She said apologize." It wasn't a question, but a command, delivered with such quiet authority that it cut through the tension like a razor. His eyes, though still partially obscured by the baseball cap, held a depth of experience that suggested he wasn't someone to be trifled with. He hadn't raised his voice, hadn't made a threatening gesture, but the sheer weight of his presence was enough. Mr. Thorne swallowed hard, his bravado completely gone. He looked at Mrs. Davies, who was trying to make herself smaller in her armchair, then back at Sarah, whose eyes held no mercy. "I apologize, Mrs. Davies," he mumbled, the words grudging and barely audible. "I didn't mean to upset you." Sarah didn't release him immediately. She held his wrist for another long moment, her gaze unwavering, making sure the apology was genuine, or at least that the fear behind it was. Then, with a decisive twist, she let go. Mr. Thorne stumbled back, rubbing his wrist, his face red with a mixture of pain and humiliation. "Now, about these papers," Sarah continued, her voice still sharp, turning her attention to the stack he still clutched in his hand. "My brother-in-law, Mark, is a paralegal. He's reviewed these documents, and he found several discrepancies. Not just minor ones, but significant errors that suggest this reevaluation is highly questionable, if not outright fraudulent." Mr. Thorne, though shaken, tried to regain some semblance of control. "That's ridiculous. Sterling Properties operates with full transparency. These are standard procedures. Your brother-in-law doesn't know what he's talking about." But his voice lacked conviction, and he avoided Sarah's piercing gaze. "He knows enough to recognize a predatory lending tactic when he sees one," Sarah shot back, stepping forward. "And he advised my mother to make this payment, which she did. Show me the proof that it wasn't received." She pointed to the crumpled envelope Mrs. Davies still clutched. "Mom, give me that." Mrs. Davies, her hands still trembling, handed the envelope to Sarah. Sarah carefully extracted a small, carbon copy receipt. "Here it is. Dated last week. Payment made in full for the amount due. Signed by a J. Peterson at Sterling Properties." She held it out towards Mr. Thorne. "So, where's the mistake? Because it certainly isn't on my mother's end." Mr. Thorne glanced at the receipt, his eyes narrowing. That's not in our system," he stammered, though his eyes seemed to dart away from the specific name and date. "There might be a delay in processing, or it could be a fake. People try to pull this all the time." Hammer, who had been observing silently, stepped closer. He took the receipt from Sarah, his large fingers carefully holding the small slip of paper. He examined it, his eyes scanning every detail, his mind processing the information with a cold, analytical precision that belied his rough exterior. His past life had taught him a great deal about forged documents, about subtle inconsistencies, about the scent of a lie. This receipt, to his practiced eye, looked legitimate. The ink, the paper, the carbon copy, it all seemed authentic. "Looks pretty real to me," Hammer said, his voice quiet but carrying an undeniable weight. He looked up at Mr. Thorne, his gaze piercing. "J. Peterson, you say? I'm sure Sterling Properties keeps detailed records of their employees. It wouldn't be hard to confirm if a J. Peterson works there, or if this signature is valid. And if it is, then the problem isn't with Mrs. Davies, is it? The problem is with Sterling Properties and their processing delays." The implied threat in Hammer's voice was clear. He wasn't just Sarah's cousin anymore, he was a force to be reckoned with, a man who seemed to have an uncanny ability to see through deception. Mr. Thorne visibly paled. He had expected to intimidate an elderly woman, perhaps a young, inexperienced plumber. He had not expected to face a determined daughter backed by a silent, menacing giant who seemed to know the ins and outs of corporate fraud. "Look, this is highly irregular," Mr. Thorne blustered, trying to sound offended, but his voice cracked slightly. "I'm just following company policy. You're interfering with a legitimate business transaction. I'm leaving, but this isn't over. Sterling Properties will pursue this through all legal channels." He turned to go, eager to escape the suffocating presence of Hammer and the fiery gaze of Sarah. "Wait a minute," Sarah said, her voice stopping him cold. "You're not just leaving. You're going to give my mother a written acknowledgement that this payment has been received and that this reevaluation is on hold until my brother-in-law can properly review everything with Sterling's legal department." Mr. Thorne scoffed. "I can't do that. I don't have the authority." "Then you can call someone who does," Hammer interjected, his voice still low, but with an edge that made Thorne jump. "Right now. On speakerphone. And you'll explain that you've encountered unforeseen complications. Or, we can have a very different conversation about what constitutes harassment and fraudulent practices when a paralegal and a concerned citizen are involved. Hammer let the word citizen hang in the air, a subtle nod to the fact that his true identity was far from ordinary. His eyes bore into Thorne's, conveying a silent promise of relentless pursuit should he choose to continue his bullying tactics. The Hell's Angel in Hammer was fully awake now, not in a violent, destructive way, but in a strategic, protective one. He was a master of intimidation, of reading people, of understanding leverage. And right now, Mr. Thorne was clearly outmatched and terrified. Thorne hesitated, glancing from Sarah's fierce expression to Hammer's unblinking stare. The thought of arguing further, of raising his voice, seemed to shrivel in his throat. He knew he was beaten, at least for the moment. Pulling out his phone, his hands fumbling slightly, he dialed a number. "This is Mr. Thorne," he said, his voice now noticeably subdued, almost meek. "I'm at the Davies property." "Yes, the one with the outstanding balance. There's been a misunderstanding regarding a recent payment. And, well, the family has engaged legal counsel to review the reevaluation documents. So, we'll need to put a hold on any further action until this can be properly clarified." "Yes, I understand. I'll need a formal letter stating that, for the client." "Thank you." He hung up, looking utterly defeated. "They'll send an email confirming the hold and acknowledging receipt of the payment. It should arrive within the hour." He avoided looking at Sarah or Hammer, his gaze fixed on the floor. "Good," Sarah said, a hint of satisfaction in her voice. "And you will personally ensure that this is resolved fairly, Mr. Thorne. Any further issues, and you'll be hearing directly from Mark, and then from his firm." Mr. Thorne merely nodded, clearly wanting nothing more than to escape. He turned and practically scurried out the door, not even bothering with a farewell. The front door clicked shut, leaving a sudden, almost deafening silence in the small living room. Mrs. Davies let out a shaky breath, her hand flying to her chest. "Oh, Sarah," she whispered, tears welling in her eyes. "Thank you, darling. I was so worried." Sarah immediately softened, rushing to her mother's side and embracing her tightly. "It's okay, Mom. It's okay now. He's gone." She stroked her mother's silver hair, her own fierce demeanor melting away into loving concern. Hammer watched the exchange, a strange mixture of emotions swirling within him. He saw the fierce protector transform back into a gentle daughter, and the contrast was stunning. He had witnessed countless acts of aggression, of loyalty, of courage in his life, but rarely had he seen such a raw, untamed defense of family, especially from someone he had only known as his meticulous plumber. It was a profound lesson, delivered in the most unexpected of settings. He cleared his throat, reminding them of his presence. Sarah pulled back from her mother, her eyes still a little wet, but now looking at Hammer with a newfound respect and gratitude. "Thank you, John," she said, her voice sincere. I really appreciate your help. You didn't have to do that." Hammer just grunted, a non-committal sound. "Just doing my job, apprentice," he said, a faint, almost imperceptible smirk playing on his lips. "Can't have customers getting harassed, can we? It's bad for business." He knew it was a flimsy excuse, but it was the only one he had. The truth was, he had been genuinely moved, genuinely compelled to act. The primal instinct to protect, usually reserved for his brothers, or his own interests, had flared up for Sarah and her mother. It was unsettling and strangely exhilarating. "Well," Sarah said, gathering her composure, a small smile finally touching her lips. "Now that that's over, maybe we should actually get to that leaky pipe before it floods the house." She picked up her toolbox, a slight tremor still in her hands, but her resolve was back. Hammer nodded, his eyes still lingering on the spot where Mr. Thorne had stood, a dark thought already forming in his mind. Sterling Properties. He had a feeling he hadn't heard the last of them, and he intended to make sure they hadn't heard the last of him. This wasn't just about a leaky pipe anymore, it was about protecting his employee, her family, and perhaps, in a strange way, a nascent sense of justice that was stirring within the Hell's Angel disguised as a plumber. He would make some calls, pull some strings, delve into the shadowy world of corporate real estate. The game had changed, and John Hammer Sullivan was about to show Sterling Properties a different kind of solution than they were used to. The quiet menace that had briefly surfaced was far from dormant, it was merely calculating its next move. He knew places, knew people, who could make life very uncomfortable for predatory companies. The plumbing job was a front, yes, but it had just given him a very personal reason to get involved. With Mr. Thorne's hasty retreat, the small living room was left with an echo of his bluster and the lingering scent of stale cologne. Mrs. Davies, still visibly shaken, held on to Sarah, finding comfort in her daughter's embrace. Hammer, meanwhile, had taken a step back, allowing them their moment. He watched them, a familiar tightness in his chest beginning to ease. It was a sensation he rarely felt, the quiet satisfaction of a battle won, not with fists and fury, but with strategic intimidation and a touch of calculated menace. "Are you all right, Mom?" Sarah asked, her voice now soft and filled with concern. Mrs. Davies nodded, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue Sarah offered. "Yes, darling, thanks to you. And to John," she added, glancing at Hammer with a grateful, if slightly bewildered, smile. "I don't know what I would have done." Hammer gave another non-committal grunt, though a flicker of something akin to warmth touched his eyes. "Just part of the service, Mrs. Davies," he mumbled, trying to maintain his gruff apprentice persona. "Can't have our clients getting pushed around." Sarah finally straightened up, a determined glint returning to her eyes. "All right, Mom, let's get that pipe fixed. John and I will take care of it." She turned to Hammer, a silent understanding passing between them. The professional distance that had always existed had subtly shifted, replaced by a nascent camaraderie forged in the heat of an unexpected confrontation. They made their way to the bathroom, the air still thick with the aftermath of the encounter. Sarah, ever the professional, quickly located the source of the leak beneath the sink. It was a hairline crack in a copper pipe, steadily dripping into a corroded catch basin. "Standard wear and tear for a house this age," she explained, pulling out her tools. "Nothing we can't handle." Hammer, now genuinely interested in the mechanics of the repair, watched her work. He handed her tools, held the flashlight, and even offered a surprisingly insightful suggestion about bracing the pipe during the repair. His hands, though calloused from a lifetime of different kinds of work, moved with a surprising delicacy when assisting Sarah. She glanced at him, a faint smile playing on her lips. "You're not such a bad apprentice after all, John," she teased gently. "Been around a few leaks in my time," he retorted, his voice still gruff, but lacking its usual edge. Within 30 minutes, the pipe was patched, tested, and declared leak-free. Sarah cleaned up meticulously, leaving the bathroom tidier than they had found it. As they gathered their tools, Sarah's phone buzzed. It was an email. She opened it, her eyes scanning the screen. "It's from Sterling Properties," she announced, her voice tight. "A formal acknowledgement of Mom's payment, and confirmation that the reevaluation is on hold pending review by their legal department. Just as Mr. Thorne promised." A wave of relief washed over Mrs. Davies, who had been hovering anxiously in the doorway. "Oh, thank goodness," she sighed, pressing a hand to her chest. "Thank you both, so much." As they walked out to the plumbing van, the sun now higher in the sky, Hammer's mind was already churning. The immediate crisis was averted, but his instincts told him this was far from over. Sterling Properties. The name resonated with a distasteful familiarity. He knew their type, corporate vultures preying on the vulnerable, cloaking their schemes in legalese and bureaucratic jargon. This wasn't just about Mrs. Davies anymore. It was about principle, and a sense of justice that had been rekindled within him. "So, what happens now?" Sarah asked, breaking into his thoughts as she started the van. Hammer stared out the window, his gaze distant. "Now, we make sure they don't try this again. Not with your mom, and not with anyone else if we can help it." He leaned back, a plan already beginning to form in the intricate pathways of his mind. "You mentioned your brother-in-law, Mark, is a paralegal?" "Yes, Mark Jensen." "He's really good," Sarah replied, pulling away from the curb. "He's been looking into those reevaluation papers. He said they were full of red flags. Good, Hammer said, a grim satisfaction in his voice. I want you to connect me with him. Tell him I'm an interested party. Someone who might have some resources to help him dig deeper. He paused, then added, and tell him to look into Sterling Properties' history. Any complaints, any past lawsuits, any regulatory actions. Everything. Sarah looked at him, surprised. You really want to get involved, don't you? Hammer met her gaze, his eyes shadowed by the brim of his cap. Let's just say I don't like bullies, Sarah. And I have a knack for finding out things people want to keep hidden. The subtle shift in his tone, the steel beneath the gruff exterior, was unmistakable. Sarah saw a glimpse of the man he truly was, not just the plumber in a work shirt. A shiver ran down her spine, not of fear, but of a quiet awe. She knew, instinctively, that John Hammer Sullivan was not a man to make idle threats. Over the next few weeks, Hammer orchestrated a quiet, relentless campaign against Sterling Properties. He didn't use brute force or overt threats, at least not directly. Instead, he leveraged his vast network of contacts, a web of individuals from various walks of life who owed him favors, feared him, or simply respected his formidable reputation. He started with information. A former associate, now a retired private investigator with an affinity for digging up dirt, was tasked with unearthing Sterling Properties' corporate structure, their financial dealings, and the names of their key executives. Another contact, a tech-savvy hacker who had once done some favors for the Hells Angels, was pointed towards their digital footprint, looking for vulnerabilities, for any signs of illicit activity. He even put out feelers to a few old friends in the real estate and construction world, men who knew the underbelly of property development and financing, asking for whispers, for rumors, for anything that might reveal Sterling Properties' true nature. The information began to flow in, a steady stream of data that painted a disturbing picture. Sterling Properties wasn't just aggressive, they were predatory. They targeted elderly homeowners in gentrifying neighborhoods, using confusing legal documents and aggressive debt collectors like Mr. Thorne to strong-arm them into selling their properties at undervalued prices, or to default on loans through deliberately obscured payment processes. The reevaluation papers that had triggered Sarah's outburst were a common tactic, designed to inflate property values artificially, creating a false sense of debt and urgency. Hammer meticulously pieced together the puzzle, sitting late at night in his dimly lit office, the glow of his computer screen illuminating his tattooed forearms. He cross-referenced the data with Mark Jensen, Sarah's brother-in-law, who was equally engrossed in the legal aspects. Mark, though initially wary of Hammer's shadowy connections, quickly recognized the invaluable nature of the intelligence Hammer was providing. It was the kind of privileged, insider information that legal teams spent months, even years, trying to unearth. "This is incredible, John," Mark said one evening during a phone call, his voice filled with professional admiration. "The patterns you've uncovered, the shell corporations, the interlocking directorships, it's a systematic scheme. We could be looking at a class action lawsuit here, potentially even criminal charges for fraud." Hammer simply grunted. "Just give me the targets, Mark. The weak points. The leverage." One of the key figures Hammer identified was a man named Arthur Vance, the CEO of Sterling Properties. Vance was a slick, outwardly respectable businessman, a pillar of the community, but the investigation revealed a history of shady dealings, a network of shell companies used to obscure profits, and a penchant for intimidating anyone who stood in his way. He was the architect of the predatory scheme, pulling the strings from behind a veil of corporate legitimacy. Hammer decided Vance needed a more direct, yet still subtle, message. He arranged for a series of unfortunate events to befall Vance, not physically harmful, but designed to create maximum discomfort and psychological pressure. Vance's expensive car mysteriously developed persistent, unfixable electrical problems. His carefully manicured lawn was repeatedly, and anonymously, vandalized with non-toxic, but highly visible, graffiti that highlighted Sterling Properties' unethical practices. Anonymous, untraceable emails with damning snippets of information about his personal and corporate misdeeds began appearing in the inboxes of his business associates and social acquaintances, just enough to sow seeds of doubt and suspicion. The pressure mounted. Vance, a man accustomed to being in control, found his meticulously curated life slowly unraveling. He became paranoid, his sleep disturbed, his public image tarnished. He knew someone was behind it, but he couldn't trace the source. The subtle, relentless nature of the attacks was far more unsettling than any overt threat. Meanwhile, Mark, armed with Hammer's intelligence, prepared a comprehensive legal brief. He reached out to a prominent consumer protection law firm, presenting them with the compelling evidence of Sterling Properties' fraudulent practices. The firm, seeing the potential for a massive class action suit and a significant public victory, eagerly took on the case. The first public blow came when a local investigative journalist, anonymously tipped off by one of Hammer's contacts, published a scathing exposé on Sterling Properties. The article detailed their predatory tactics, highlighted numerous victims, and, crucially, cited the discrepancies in Mrs. Davies' reevaluation papers as a prime example. The piece created a public outcry, and suddenly, Sterling Properties was under intense scrutiny. Regulatory bodies began to open investigations. Mr. Thorne, the aggressive debt collector, was one of the first casualties. Overwhelmed by the escalating scandal and facing internal investigations, Sterling Properties quickly made him a scapegoat, firing him amidst accusations of unauthorized practices. His career, built on intimidation, crumbled. The pressure on Arthur Vance became unbearable. With legal action looming, regulatory bodies breathing down his neck, and his reputation in tatters, he faced a choice: fight a losing battle that would expose him to criminal charges, or cut his losses. Hammer had ensured that the latter was the more appealing, and less painful, option. One morning, a week after the exposé, Sarah received a call from Mark. "It's over," he said, his voice triumphant. "Sterling Properties is settling. They're offering full restitution to all affected homeowners, including a significant compensation package for Mrs. Davies. They're also agreeing to pay all legal fees and have committed to a complete overhaul of their business practices under independent oversight. Vance is stepping down, and the company is being rebranded under new leadership." Sarah was speechless. "They're just giving up." "They had no choice," Mark explained. "The evidence was overwhelming, and the public outcry was deafening. Plus, there was some additional pressure from sources I can't quite identify. Let's just say someone did a very thorough job of making their lives miserable." Sarah knew exactly who that someone was. She hung up the phone and immediately called Hammer. "You did it, John," she said, her voice filled with a mixture of awe and profound gratitude. "They're settling. Mom is safe. Everyone is safe." Hammer listened, a rare, genuine smile touching his lips. "Good," he said, the single word conveying a depth of satisfaction few would ever guess. "Just good business, Sarah. Keeping our customers happy." The resolution brought a sense of closure, not just for Mrs. Davies, but for Hammer as well. He had found a new purpose, a different kind of justice to pursue. His plumbing business, once merely a front, had become a conduit for unexpected acts of protection and righteous intervention. He still navigated the world of clogged drains and leaky faucets, but now, he did so with a renewed sense of vigilance, scanning the mundane for signs of the insidious, for those who preyed on the unsuspecting. His relationship with Sarah had deepened into a unique bond of mutual respect. She saw past the gruff exterior, recognizing the fierce loyalty and unconventional morality that drove him. And Hammer, in turn, saw in Sarah not just a meticulous employee, but a woman of unwavering strength and integrity, a lioness defending her own. She was, in her own quiet way, as formidable as any Hell's Angel he had ever known. One afternoon, a few months later, Hammer found himself back at Mrs. Davies' house for a routine checkup on the repaired pipe. The garden was even more vibrant, the paint on the bungalow had been refreshed, and Mrs. Davies herself looked years younger, her eyes sparkling with newfound peace. "John, dear, please come in," she greeted him warmly. "Sarah is just finishing up some paperwork inside." As he stepped into the living room, he saw Sarah sitting at the small dining table, reviewing invoices. She looked up, her face lighting up with a genuine smile. "Hey, John. All good with the pipe?" "Solid as a rock," he confirmed. He glanced around the room, which now felt lighter, freer, no longer haunted by the shadow of Mr. Thorne. "Mom's even talking about planting some new roses out front," Sarah added, a note of happiness in her voice. Thanks to you, she can finally relax. Hammer simply nodded, his gaze lingering on a framed photograph on the mantelpiece, a smiling Mrs. Davies, arm in arm with a proud Sarah. He felt a quiet pride swell within him, a feeling far more profound than any rush he'd ever gotten from a successful score or a victorious brawl. He had started Sullivan's Plumbing Solutions as a disguise, a means to an end. But in defending Sarah's mother, in confronting the unseen predators of the corporate world, he had discovered something unexpected. He was still John Hammer Sullivan, a man forged in chrome and leather, but he was also a plumber, a protector, an unlikely guardian of the innocent. The open road still called, but now, his path was also paved with the quiet dignity of a job well done, and the fierce satisfaction of a battle fought, and won, on behalf of those who couldn't fight for themselves. The Hell's Angel disguised as a plumber had found a new kind of hell to raise, and a new kind of justice to deliver, one leaky pipe and one corporate predator at a time. His true identity remained hidden in plain sight, but his purpose had never been clearer.